Hello, and welcome to Breast Cancer Conversations, a podcast brought to you by survivingbreastcancer.org. I'm Laura Carfing, breast cancer survivor and founder of survivingbreastcancer.org, a nonprofit organization providing community, education, and resources to empower those diagnosed with breast cancer and their caregivers from day one and beyond. Welcome to another episode of Breast Cancer Conversations. I am so glad you guys are here. We are diving into an incredible interview today with Dr. Troso Sandoval. Dr. Troso is a highly esteemed medical oncologist with more than 2 decades of experience in treating women's cancers. In addition to her work caring for cancer patients in her own practice, Dr. Troso is now expanding her research to help oncology audiences across the country. Dr. Troso possesses a remarkable skill in addressing the symptoms of the patient's disease and the side effects of treatment. She specializes in using simple language and relatable examples to help patients and their families understand complex medical information better. Before we jump into today's episode, I just want to remind everyone that our podcast, Breast Cancer Conversations, is available wherever you listen to your podcast, be it Spotify, Apple, iTunes, whatever they're calling it these days, on our website, wherever you consume your podcast content. It is brought to you by survivingbreastcancer.org, which is our nonprofit. And so we rely on family and friends and people like you, our listeners, to help donate and raise critical funds to keep our podcast going. We also offer a variety of programs, everything from support groups to meditation, yoga, qigong. We started doing hypnosis recently. We now have our radical remission workshop coming up. We have support groups for caregivers. Like, the list just goes on. So hop on over to survivingbreastcancer.org/events and sign up for one of our events today. I would love to put a name to a face and see you online. I'm sure there's a million more things I could share with you, but I'm definitely drawing a blank, so thank you, Chemo Brain. Let's dive into today's interview. Welcome to the conversation. That we actually had the opportunity to meet in person at the annual San Antonio Breast Cancer Symposium, which is held every year in San Antonio, and it's one of the largest conferences, medical conferences for breast oncology. And over the years, I think I've been going like 6-7 years now, like plus or minus the COVID years. And it has definitely grown in terms of patient advocacy presence. And that has been something I've really appreciated, where patient advocates are able to come to these medical conferences and sit alongside these amazing doctors across the breast cancer spectrum, whether you're an oncologist, we've met with surgeons, radiologists, pathologists, amazing scientists who are here giving the latest and greatest in breast cancer research. So again, Dr. Troso, it's so nice to have you on today's podcast.
I am so honored to be here, Laura, and it was such a wonderful meeting you at the San Antonio Breast Cancer Conference. I have to say that I think that some of the things that I learned the most from were from some of the patient advocates while I was there, and I really, really enjoyed listening to the things that they were working on and all the problems that they were trying to overcome in terms of helping women with breast cancer, and it really shapes what I do to learn from you directly.
Great segue. Why don't you give a little introduction about your background in women's health, women's cancers, and oncology?
Sure. So, Dr. Tiffany Troso, I'm a medical oncologist, and I worked at Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center for 25 years. I actually retired in August 2024 due to my own medical problem, which is a chronic illness that was inhibiting my ability to really keep up with the day-to-day. I have a visual disturbance that it's not really the point of the podcast, so I won't get into it, but I don't want your listeners to worry about me. I'm healthy. I'm just losing my vision. At any rate, I had taken some time off medically and really just had an epiphany while I was off, and just thought there's more I can do to help women with breast and gynecological cancers, which I had specialized in. I've treated thousands and thousands of patients, and yet I still feel that there are very large gaps in what patients actually need from their oncologist. And I'm working to actually try and fill some of those gaps.
Yeah, and I'm sure you're doing so in a variety of ways, not only with your own work on your own podcast, which we'll talk about a little bit. You just mentioned also prior to our recording that you're writing and publishing 2 books. You are launching these new programs to really help cancer survivorship. So I'm excited to dig into all of these topics because as a patient, it's so overwhelming to navigate a cancer journey, a breast cancer journey specifically. And what I'm noticing too, that there's different intersection points, different moments of intervention where we need help and support along the way. And you don't know this when you're going through it. And it hits you in waves. I kind of equate it to like grief and trauma, where some days you feel like you got this and you're in control. And then there's other days where you're like, people are telling me to stay positive and be strong, and I just can't today. Like, I just want to bury myself under the blankets.
I just wrote an article about that specifically for your husband for the newsletter. It was about how having a positive mindset is not about trying to stay positive, but it's about how you build resilience and how you experience your journey. And I agree with you. So I didn't mean to pick that one part. It was just that it's like a perfect segue to this article I just wrote. So
First off, thank you so much for being a guest blogger and submitting articles for our newsletter. If you're listening and you're not already a subscriber, head on over to survivingbreastcancer.org/subscribe, and you'll be added to our mailing list and receive emails from us every Monday. We hear about this term toxic positivity, where people are just trying to tell you like good vibes only and stay positive and, you can beat this or you've got this. And so many times we realize that language could actually really diminish the patient experience, especially if you're living with a metastatic disease where we might not beat this because there still is no cure.
In the article, I talk about how it's people's like immediate reaction and be like, oh, stay positive. Exactly like you said, you've got this, just you got to think positive thoughts, as if being positive could actually make the cancer go away, which is not realistic. But a lot of what I try to do and to try to impart on my patients and the people that I work with is learning how to become resilient and empowered yourself. And that in doing so, you actually make your journey emotionally more stable because you're more in control. And that it's not a matter of, just think positive. It's more a matter of, okay, what do I need to understand here so that I can interact appropriately and ask the right questions of my doctor to make sure that I'm getting the treatment that I need that feels right to me, because it's not one size fits all. And a lot of what we do in oncology is very prescriptive and really needs to be more of a communication, I think.
In your tenure at Memorial Sloan Kettering, I'm sure you've saw not just the advancements of treatment, but has your style of working with the patients evolved over that time as well?
Absolutely. I mean, and some of that is maturity and experience and self-confidence, right? So when you're what I used to call a baby doctor, if a patient would ask you questions, sometimes you'd feel a little threatened, like they didn't trust you or they didn't believe what you were saying or that they thought they knew more than you. And, really as I gained more and more experience, I mean, over 25 years, there's a lot of experience to be had. I really learned to participate in a conversation, a two-way conversation with the patient. And I think that as I, developed more and more rapport with my patients and began to understand more about what was important to them, what obstacles were they facing, it was more than just, okay, let's give you a different medicine to treat your nausea. It really became helping the patient survive emotionally and physically in this new world that they've been thrust into, that nobody wants to be in, and really learning to partner with the patients as well as with colleagues to help make sure that the patients are completely understanding and they have confidence in what they're doing and the decisions they make, have clarity about their diagnosis and their disease and their treatment. And also, I spend a lot of time with my patients, especially towards the end, making sure that they were building the community that they needed to help them succeed. And that's something that I find that especially women are often reluctant to do, because we're the caretakers. We're the ones that usually are in control. We run the house. We often will run the workplace. And, in the smaller ways, you might not be the CEO, but you might be the secretary that helps run the whole program and just makes the CEO look good. Or maybe you are the CEO. In fact, I often would tell my patients to be the CEO of your medical care. You need to be in charge.
That is such a huge responsibility. Yes, we are in charge. And at the same time, we're trying to navigate multiple appointments with multiple specialists potentially,
Yep.
and all of the scheduling. And it was so eye-opening to me where I was getting treated that all of my medical doctors were in the same practice.
Hmm.
However, there was no coordination on if I was coming in for blood work or seeing my oncologist or a checkup with my radiologist. These were all different days. taking and trying to take time off of work, find
Yep.
childcare, parking, like all of these things. And I would rather have one of those marathon days at the hospital than, pockets here and there where I'm piecemealing with my boss and my work, trying to find time off for my own health. But it's overwhelming.
But that's an interesting point that you bring up also because, and that's why it's so important to talk to the patients and to try to help them coordinate their care because sometimes some patients become overwhelmed. And if they have a CAT scan one day, that's all they want to deal with. They don't want to then go see the doctor afterwards or what have you. But some people, like yourself, might feel that it's more conducive to living your life if you stack all of your appointments together. And so it's not our place to decide how those things happen, and that's something that needs to be coordinated depending on what the patient wants, right?
As a patient, maybe listening to this segment, who would they work with?
The thing is that every practice is going to run differently, right? And so, there are many places where they do have patient navigators, and there are also nurse navigators, what have you. As a concierge now, that I'm providing one-on-one concierge type care where I am, helping to micromanage patients from afar. That would be something that I would look into and perhaps would coordinate with the offices. I think that, depending where you are in your treatment process, usually I always felt as the medical oncologist that I was sort of like the point guard. I was the center of the wheel because oftentimes after a patient had surgery, they would be mostly in medical oncology care. And then the medical oncologist would decide what other specialists they need to see, radiation doctors, what other scans need to be have. So I often feel like the medical oncology office and maybe the coordinator for that particular physician that you're working with would be the one that could kind of oversee the whole schedule. I know my assistant always was very savvy about looking at that and talking to the patients about it. So yeah, I would probably start with your medical oncology office coordinator.
You talked a little bit about treatment, and I want to linger on this a little bit because, understanding patient preferences is very important. And you started off this conversation acknowledging that sometimes oncology can be very prescriptive, right? Like, okay, so I've been doing this for 25 plus years. You have HER2 positive breast cancer. Your mind is immediately going into, I know the drugs that you're going to be on in the practice and the process, and we'll
Right.
see you in 6 months, right? So how do we
Or
have
6 days.
6 days, exactly. I remember my oncologist telling me, and on day 17, when I see you next, your hair is going to be completely gone. And he knew exactly the day that I was going to lose all of my hair because he's just been doing this for so long. So, how do we keep that human approach when it's the first time that the patient is hearing this news, but you're clearly the expert and understands the entire gamut of treatment options?
Sure. So, I also find that, just as an aside, that sometimes treatment choices or recommendations may vary per institution. So there's Memorial Sloan Kettering's favorite way to treat HER2 positive breast cancer, and there might be, you know, MD Anderson has their own little twist on it, and they might do it slightly differently. But there are always things that can be done for the most part to make some things simpler. So, for example, um, there are trade-offs. So, for example, if a patient that is going to get needs to get Taxol, one of the chemotherapies, that if you give it every 3 weeks or every 2 weeks at the bigger dose, your hair is going to come out pretty much 14 to 21 days from the day you get the drug. On the other hand, if you give it low dose and you give it weekly, then the patient would need to come in 12 weeks in a row instead of 4 times every 3 weeks, for example. Um, and the patient uses a cooling cap, scalp cooling, they probably won't lose their hair. So, there are little things like that that you need to know from the patient, like, well, what's really important to her? And I have had, in my experience, patients refuse certain treatments because they absolutely will not lose their hair. And that's, I mean, from where I sit right now, maybe that wouldn't be my choice and it doesn't seem like a priority to me. But every person that walks into my office is a different world, right? And they have their own sets of priorities. And so if it's that important, we have to look at what regimens we have, what options that we have that could still provide effective treatment, but that might be, all right, a little less convenient because you have to come every week. But hey, at the end of 12 weeks, you'll probably still have all of your hair. So when you go to your daughter's wedding, you don't have to wear a wig. right? And so, there's just a million scenarios that are out there like that. Um, if the doctor tells you there's absolutely no other options, you do have to press them a little bit, I guess, and or seek a second opinion. You never want to compromise your care, obviously, but if there are choices to be made, they should be given to you to make.
I'm glad you bring up that there can even be differences in approach from institution to institution, because we find even in our peer-to-peer support groups when we're talking, and we're very a close-knit breast cancer community, and I'll be like, oh my gosh, my doctor didn't offer me that option, or my doctor is doing it this way versus this way. And I think as the patient, we get confused of like, why? And then I think going back to your point, we want to advocate for ourselves. We want to ask our doctors. We don't mean to do so in a way of not trusting the situation, but it's just like we're just trying to gather as much information as possible to understand why are these decisions being made. And some people want all that information, and some other people are like, you know what, my doctor is following its course. I don't even need to question it. So, just depending on how comfortable you feel. I was one of those patients who did not get a second opinion. And I had family members who were really pushing me for second opinions. I'm in Boston and I, have access to some excellent hospitals. And I was just like, you know what? I really resonated with my oncologist. Him and I clicked right away, and I didn't need a second opinion for anything. It was just like, you know what? We're on board. At the time, I was like, I want the most aggressive treatment. I'm going to say yes to everything. And that was my path. So now it's interesting because some of the therapies have changed so much that you don't need to be as aggressive as we were, 5, 6 years ago either. And so you were mentioning kind of like the dosing levels can actually play an effect
And the
on,
schedule, sure. Yep.
yes. So all of
Yep.
these new things that actually probably make the quality of life for the patient so much better.
And just a word about second opinions, which is another thing that as I grew in my practice, that you learn to accept that patients sometimes need another explanation. Maybe some other doctor can explain it a little bit better than I did, that will resonate better with that patient. Maybe that other doctor has another option that I didn't think of. I mean, I doubt it, but I'm just kidding.
Of course.
But yeah, no, but
You
you know
never
what I'm
know.
saying. I mean,
Absolutely.
I always used to tell my patients that it's not personal to me if you want a second opinion. It's not about me. It's about you. And if you need more reassurance, you want to see what else is out there. Maybe there are clinical trials at another institution that I don't have. It's not personal. It's professional, and I think it's very important for physicians to work collaboratively together. And I really had the opportunity to do that a lot at a big institution like Sloan Kettering because we often would see so many second opinions. And so, that was part and parcel of what I did. And, is really now become an outreach of what I'm doing now on a one-to-one basis. And so I find that it's very helpful for just a second set of explanations, or maybe I can draw a diagram that will make it click for you. And you know what I'm saying? So it's actually, I think it's important if you don't feel completely comfortable or you don't like the options, I wouldn't run from treatment, but maybe you just see what else somebody else has to say. And always tell your doctor because they find out anyway. So
Good point. Good point. Yes.
always just tell them.
We're not cheating on anybody. We're just going out there being
Exactly.
transparent. So,
Exactly.
yeah.
And I also find that, what works well, I've used personally, is use I statements instead of you statements. So I am not very comfortable having treatment every week because I have to pick up my daughter who is disabled from camp every Friday afternoon. And so now as a physician, I understand why you're pushing back on the treatment, as opposed to no, I don't want that, and then not explain, because most physicians, we're all in this because we want to help people, right? I mean, nobody goes into being a medical oncologist to be rich and famous. You get there because you have a drive and a passion to help people, and so the more we understand about where you're coming from, the more we can help, right? And so I always think it's very important to make sure that you're voicing your concerns clearly so your doctor can work with them.
I'm curious about this pivot that you're making. So you leave your tenure in this profession and you are now starting your own journey, helping one-on-one patients navigate this very complex and overwhelming system. So as someone who launched survivingbreastcancer.org as a nonprofit, I am very curious to hear how you've come to this realization and how kind of that like I don't know, I call it like the cancerpreneur in us. Like, we go through like oncology and now we're just like entrepreneurs going out there and like helping people. So tell me about how you kind of came across this new pathway for you.
I never wanted to leave clinical medicine. And like I said, I had a medical problem that required me to step back and slow down a little bit. But by taking patients on one, I can really spend the time to get to know them and understand them and help them understand things at a deeper level. And I actually have a whole program. So I'm not just one on one. I also have another company called Winning the Cancer Journey. And that is primarily for group education. I have an online course I'm creating. I have 2 books I was telling you about that I'm writing. And so, I'm sort of working on both sides. I'm working one-on-one with patients to help them really dive deep into their treatments and understanding and to help them navigate things. And then I'm also going in the group fashion and publicly. So I love to speak at different organizations. So if anybody needs a speaker on anything, I love to do that. And I have these 2 books that I'm writing. So one is about my program directly, and it's called The Empowered Patient Program. And I go through the 3 pillars that I think are most important for patients to really have the most fruitful treatment and empower themselves to get the best possible outcome. So when I say winning the cancer journey, I don't mean that I can tell you how you're going to beat cancer and that I've got the answer to everything. That's not it. What I mean is that you are going to get the best possible outcome in the most comfortable way with the best support, understanding, and confidence. And so clarity, confidence, and community are my 3 pillars. And I teach patients how to learn and participate in their care. I learn, how we can help build these communities together. And, a lot of this came, all of it came from, in fact, when I wrote let me back up. The first book I wrote, which still hasn't been published yet, I got to kick it out there. I just got to do it. But the first, yeah. So the first book I wrote is basically about a person getting diagnosed with cancer from the second they know something's wrong, the chest x-ray, the mammogram, what have you, all the way through, well, what does the workup look like? What are all the scans? Who are all the actors that I'm going to be meeting? What are the different types of treatment? All the way through survivorship, right? And it really is breaking down all of the complex lingo that I know we have a lot of very well-educated cancer survivors here, but as we mentioned before, you forget that not everybody is maybe as attuned to the cancer lingo. And so, this is born out of the fact that how many times when I was reviewing a CAT scan did a patient say, well, wait, is that a tumor? You just said it was a nodule. It's a spot. It's a mass. It's a tumor. Well, yeah, actually, those are all synonymous when we're talking about cancers in different ways. Explaining to the patient, here's an interesting conversation. So I had a patient who had ovarian cancer. Okay. And she came to me for a second opinion, and she was about 3 weeks out from her surgery. And she and her husband were outraged. And they had to come to Sloan Kettering because they were really upset that their doctor wouldn't order them a PET scan. Because everybody told her that she needs a PET scan. It's the most, high level test. Why can't I get it? Why is he gatekeeping it? And unfortunately, that was a missed opportunity for this physician because he just needed to explain. So she understood, well, what is a CAT scan, an MRI, and what is a PET scan? And why can't you have a PET scan 3 weeks after a major abdominal surgery? Well, because it takes up sugar, right? You get an injection of a radioactive sugar that localizes to tumors, but it also localizes to infections and to places of healing. Anything that's growing quickly will take up this sugar and will glow brightly on the PET scan. So ordering a PET scan on somebody that had major surgery within 6 to 8 weeks of the last surgery is going to have false positives. It's not going to be clear, and it's not going to tell us what we want to know. And so actually, the doctor had ordered an MRI of the abdomen and pelvis, which was probably the best test, or a CAT scan, because those are both more like geographical tests where we can see where the different organs are and see if there are spots or nodules or tumors that are growing, versus a PET scan, which is looking for activity, right? And so, I explained this to the patient and said, your doctor isn't wrong, and here's why. And, the light went on and they were like, oh, and it's sad because I often feel like patients that are not well informed or don't understand don't necessarily end up being anxious and angry and frustrated, and who needs that, right? So I think it's so important, and just all these little clinical vignettes that I've lived through with patients over the years, I poured into these two programs and these two books so that people can really learn how to best navigate their cancer.
Those are excellent examples. And I'm sitting in with the patient hat of like, I go from 0 to 60, like immediately. Like I can be cool, calm, and collected. And then the moment someone's like, oh no, we're not going to order that test, or insurance won't cover this, or blah, blah, blah. All of a sudden there's no like, okay, time out. Can you stop and explain to me why? There's no rationale anymore. It's just like second opinion, and I'm calling my BFF, trying to figure out why this is happening to me. And can
I'm
we
going
make
to
it
Google it. I'm going to
guys?
go on a Facebook group and ask
Oh
20,000
my
people that
God.
don't know more than I do.
Yes.
Yeah, it's
We've all
the
been there.
and the misinformation, unfortunately, on the internet and in social media is also really scary, because especially as a patient, you don't necessarily know what to believe and what don't not to believe. Would you believe that there's somebody on Facebook who made a fake account with my name? They just put with my name, and I'm listed as Dr. Tiffany Troso Sandoval, and they made one that says Dr. Tiffany Troso. I don't even want to say it because I don't want anybody to go there. Anyway, this person, I don't know where they are, is selling ivermectin and fenbazidol to cancer patients for cash under my name. And I've tried lawyers to get rid of it. I've written 5,000 emails to Meta. It's like screaming into the wind. I can't get it down. And when they do take it down, because I guess I had everybody I know go on and complain about it, and then they took it down for like 3 days, and boop, pops right back up again. So even if you see the doctor's name, doesn't even mean that you can trust it. So actually, what's relieving for me is that some patients will then like kind of cross-reference it. Like they'll look me up on LinkedIn or look me up somewhere else, and they'll send me a message like, "Are you selling ivermectin for cancer?" I'm like, "No, sorry, don't send that person any money. I don't think he'll even send it to you."
Oh my God.
Isn't that
Scams.
horrible?
Like it
The
is
scams
so,
are it's horrible.
oh, and they're getting so good these days too, which like also freaked me out. So speaking of, not falling down this rabbit hole of, scams or misinformation, we talk about empowerment, right? So how can we bridge this idea for needing to have information so that we can make informed decisions and that we have a level of control, but then also not going down this like, Google search to find the answers that we're looking for, right? Kind of that, what's the word for it? I'm not like, is it like confirmation bias where I'm just going to keep like searching until I can find the answer that validates what I want to hear?
Well, there are plenty of websites that are available through various major cancer institutions, for example, or the American Cancer Society. And I can certainly put together a list for you that you could put in the show notes for anybody that would be interested in looking for them. But there are plenty of very credible sites that will explain things to you. Or you can contact me and you can take my course and I'll go over it with you, and I'll send you my book. So, no, but honestly, you need to know where you can get the credible sources from. And that needs to be well documented for patients. And so if you don't understand something, you can either say to the doctor, or if you're not comfortable, say to her nurse, I just need to understand a little bit more about this treatment and why I'm getting this and not that, or why I'm stage 4 and not stage 3 anymore, or what have you. And they can give you references. I mean, they should sit down and explain it to you again. But if they don't, or they don't have time, or you want an outside source, I think that your care team is the one that should be able to supply you with a credible resource to be able to read a little bit more on it so that you're not stuck Googling it, right?
And I think whether it's like credible sources or reading or websites, going back to again the patient's preferences, I think you referenced a little bit earlier too, like even if you had a second opinion and someone was able to draw a diagram, having like the visual learner understand like this is the pathway. And my surgeon did that for me. And it was so helpful for me to see a visual of, okay, I opted for genetic testing. And he literally did this like, it was almost like create your own adventure. Like if you open this door and get this answer, this is the type of process we're going to follow. If your genetic testing comes back negative, here are your other options. And so kind of laying out this whole baseline of a variety of treatment options for me, but it was contingent upon not just my decision, but what the genetics came back saying.
100%. Yep. Very, very important. And there are all different types of genetic testing or DNA testing. Basically, there are 3 or 4 different tests that you would probably potentially encounter. One is genetic testing, right? And that's the traditional genomic hereditary DNA. And they can get that by a mouth swab or blood, right? And that looks for different genes that you may have inherited from family member, your mom, your dad, right? Like BRCA1 and 2 are them. PALB2 is another one. And it's also important to know that this day and age, when we do genetic testing for hereditary genes, it should be a whole panel and not just BRCA1 and 2, because there are several genes now that we know contribute to the risk of breast cancer that should be tested for. Second type is somatic testing, which is the tumor. So oftentimes, usually in more advanced cases or metastatic or recurrent cancer, we take a piece of the actual tumor and we take the DNA from that, because the DNA shouldn't be exactly the same as your genetic hereditary DNA, because it made itself into a tumor. It started as your cell, but then mistakes were made in the DNA. And so the tumor has its own set of abnormalities in it that made it a cancer. And so we can sequence those and name them. And, Sloan Kettering, for example, has the IMPACT program. We test over 440 genes that we know contribute to cancer. Foundation One has a test. I think Myriad has a test. There are multiple companies. There are commercial companies that have it too. And most major cancer institutions will be doing this. But the importance of that is looking for specific changes or mutations, abnormalities in the DNA that we can target. So in the case of breast cancer, for example, we might be looking for a PIK3CA mutation or an AKT mutation, a PTEN mutation, or an ESR mutation, for example. So an ESR mutation, for anybody that doesn't know, is a mutation or an abnormality that can develop in the tumor. It's usually not there in the beginning. It can be, but usually not. It more frequently will develop over time. So say a patient's on an anti-estrogen therapy for a couple of years and the cancer comes back. We test that tumor and we might find this ESR1 mutation. And what that means is the cancer has figured out how to grow even without estrogen being present. So the anti-estrogen therapies, I don't want to get too deep into that, but so we have other medicines that help treat like that. And that was very prominently explained and detailed in a bunch of different presentations at both San Antonio and at ASCO this year, how we have these new medicines that we use that once the tumor develops this new ESR1 mutation and becomes resistant to tamoxifen, Arimidex, Femara, Aromacin. We have other drugs, some are injectable and some are oral, that overcome that resistance. And so that's a really important thing for us to know. And then the third type of DNA testing that is being used more frequently in clinical trials now, it's not as much used in regular practice, is ctDNA, circulating tumor DNA. And what that is some people refer to it as a liquid biopsy, right? And so we collect a vial of blood from you, and we can test and pull out different tumor cells and then sequence the DNA from there. And so that's one way, quick and easy, that sometimes we can pick up these ESR mutations in a patient that looks like the cancer is starting to grow. And we can try and catch it on this liquid biopsy by collecting this circulating tumor DNA. It has a lot of possibilities for using for surveillance. So say somebody finishes their adjuvant preventative treatments, and we can then test to see whether there's any circulating tumor cells in circulation. And if there are, a recent study has shown that it might increase your risk that the cancers come back and it's not really gone, even though the PET scan's negative or the blood work otherwise looks normal, right? So it's not really ready for prime time. So you can't all run out and ask for ctDNA testing or liquid biopsies, but there are clinical trials that are ongoing where we're monitoring and we're trying to figure out, what is the level of importance? How many cells does there have to be for it to make a difference? Can we jump in with a new treatment earlier if we find these cells and that sort of thing? So
that was so helpful. Thank you so much. for my own understanding, so what I love to do, especially when talking to medical professionals as well, it's like, okay, let me repeat back to make sure I understood, and then also to like share like the questions that I have, because you provided this great overview of three different types of DNA testing. And so when do people start asking for this type of test? So like I gave the example, I got my genomic panel
Hmm.
initially to help
Right.
inform the surgery options in the treatment plan.
Right. And
And
just to
then
clarify, that's your hereditary risk. That's
hereditary
right.
risk. Okay,
Correct.
thank
Uh-huh.
you. And
Yep.
then the second one you were mentioning is when you're taking the DNA specifically from the tumor to see if there's any mutations within the tumor. Can that happen at the beginning, or is that usually after resistance to certain therapies have happened, or both?
It's right now, the standard way to use it is if the patient has metastatic cancer or recurrent disease.
Okay. Okay.
So it's not standardly done up front.
Hmm.
Um, there are some trials and some people looking at doing it for stage 3 patients, um, more advanced cancers, but in general, it's mostly standardized for metastatic cancer and or recurrent disease. Yeah,
Yeah.
regrowth.
The ctDNA has been a buzzword for a long time out there. And so I appreciate you, again, clarifying its potential and then saying that there's still a lot of clinical trials that people can participate in if they're eligible, et cetera.
I'm sure that there are plenty of practitioners out there. In fact, I know there are because I've had patients come to me with the test results. I'm like, how did you get that? So there are practitioners that are drawing them. And I guess either the patient pays cash for it or somehow they get their insurance company to pay for it. But, the problem is even when you come with those results, as I mentioned, we're not quite sure what to do with them yet. So, there was one study that was just presented in the past 6 months about, I think it was called the ZEST trial. And they actually looked at patients that had BRCA genomic mutations. So they had a hereditary BRCA. And after they completed all of their adjuvant treatment, they would run the ctDNA. And if they were positive, well, actually, it was randomized. Patients would either get niraparib, which is a PARP inhibitor, or they would get placebo. Because and the reason you can get away with that, it's not immoral, is because the standard of care is still to do nothing, right? So that's how you give the placebo. But the PARP inhibitors have a special place in treatment for breast cancer that has a BRCA positivity. And so they looked at this. And so the patients that had positive ctDNA, the ones that got the niraparib actually had a longer time until progression. And so, yeah, so it's very promising and it looks like something hopefully that we're going to be able to start using soon because everybody's clamoring for it. Um, but, unfortunately, we have to do clinical trials because sometimes things don't always work out exactly like you think they're going to. It seems reasonable to that if you knew that the cancer cells were there, that if you did something now, it would help prevent it from coming back in full force. But that doesn't always bear out to be true. And so we have to do the trials to make sure, A, that we're doing no harm, and B, that it actually has a positive impact. So,
We're never really ever over the cancer. It is, some days in the front of our mind, some days in the back of our mind. But as I'm approaching my 8 years, eventually 10-year mark, I'm like, oh gosh, once I get to 10, does that mean it's going to come back sooner? Especially in this setting where we do see studies showing that, some of these dormant cells will wake up 20 years down the line. Right. And so it's like, yes, we're living longer and I'm happy, but no, oh gosh, I'm scared. Is it coming? Like, oh, how do we manage the anxiety?
you control the controllables, right? And so, what are the things that you can do to make sure that you are the least hospitable host for the cancer to grow back again, right? And I don't mean, taking ivermectin, so to speak, but although there are protocols looking at that, right? What are the things that are in your control? Are you maintaining your normal weight? Are you eating healthy and balanced? Are you, checking your other health factors? Are you walking every day? Are you lifting, light weights so that you keep up good muscle mass? Are you sleeping 8 hours a day? All the little things that seem to not be like, you're like, oh yeah, I know that. But, I always would tell my patients that, especially when you've had cancer and then after you have cancer, the little things matter. Staying healthy, keeping up a strong, resilient mindset, moving forward, a growth mindset, we call it, right? That you can learn and adapt and move within your new circumstances and still live your life even maybe better than before because now you're informed about what it was like to be a cancer patient. And look what you've done, right? And so, so much of what you do is so helpful to others, but in some ways it helps you move past it as well, because you're empowering others and yourself. So I know it's a little, it's a little unsatisfying for me to tell you to just eat well and exercise and get enough sleep and drink 8 glasses of water a day. But, believe it or not, and don't smoke, and don't drink too much alcohol, or don't drink any alcohol, depending on who you ask. There's a lot to be said for those things. And so, that's what I mean by trying to stay in the moment and to control the things you can control.
Super helpful advice. Thank you.
Yeah.
Dr. Troso, this has been so helpful. How do our listeners find you and stay in touch with you?
You can text me at, ready? 516-271-4114. If you text the word cancer to that number, you will get an automated reply, and I will send you, one of my freebies. I have to decide which one we should send everybody. So text the word cancer to 516-271-4114, and I will get you on my email list, and I will send you a freebie.
Sure. I really appreciate today's conversation, sure. Dr. Troso, and all of the insights and information and empowerment and resilience you are leaving with us today. So thank you for being a guest on our show.
My pleasure, really. Thank you so much for having me.
And thank you, everyone, for listening to our show. I would like to acknowledge that all of the information on our podcast is from personal experiences and is not a substitute for professional medical advice. You should always contact your medical care team. If you are looking for specific topics or would like to be a guest on our show, please feel free to reach out. My email is laura@survivingbreastcancer.org. Our show is made possible by our nonprofit, survivingbreastcancer.org, and by our incredible donors like yourself. You can hop on over to survivingbreastcancer.org to sign up for our mailing list, make a donation, and explore the 400 plus programs we offer each year at survivingbreastcancer.org/events. Until next time, keep on thriving.